legalism. It's something that we're all constrained to in many ways, but at the same time, it's something that protects us in many ways also. So, in terms of how it has been playing out in my life recently, is that I'm in a position where I am constantly having to contract individuals. Now, whoever was in my position before was very laissez-faire about the way in which these interactions occurred. And I think it's mainly because of the fact that they were so comfortable with the individuals that they were contracting a lot of the times, that there wasn't so much of a worry about what was going to be the repercussions if something went wrong. Well, the whole idea that I want to focus on today is this idea of what happens when things go wrong. Because legalism is something that protects us in our modern systems, right? We have these standards that, because we follow them to the T, we can hold individuals accountable for them when and where they break their conduct. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. There's no such thing as any type of perfect human-made system, right? It doesn't exist. But on the contrary, what we can say is that the systems that we have in place have been a continual adaptation of the way in which we as humans have responded to our environments, our surroundings, and also the other individuals and societies that we have encountered. So this idea of Western political and theoretical legalism is something that comes out from the wellspring of the Enlightenment era and is then directly deposited into the different types of revolutions that would occur in Europe throughout the course of the 17th, 18th, and so on centuries. Eventually culminating in what we consider today as liberal democracy around the world. But that idea of general legalism developed around that time. Now, I'm not an expert in this at all. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this at all. But still, at the same time, here's what I'm trying to get at here. These different types of systems that protect us, that have become societal and social, are in many ways disintegrating when we see them from afar, even though their underpinning structures are still there. But that's not because the society as a whole is doing it. It's because we as individuals are doing it because we're aiming and orienting ourselves toward the most right solution. Because at the end of the day, in many circumstances, if not all circumstances, a human individual is able to discern between this idea of right and wrong. If you ever watched Father Ted growing up, which I didn't, but I was brought onto it as some good crack by some of my friends from the UK and Ireland, and so on and so forth. I won't get into that, but it went on into this bit about Father Ted and Dougal and saying, you know, like, oh, what do you remember, Dougal? What do you remember, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, you know, do you remember right and wrong, Dougal? The entirety of the Catholic faith, so on and so forth. Because at a most individualistic level, our fundamental understanding of what is right and what is wrong is what becomes the underpinning for this hinge that we consider legalism, because it is the way in which we're able to determine to what degree of severity we're able to actually infringe judgment. So, for example, if I took one of these books that I have resting over on the table, took it, walked out to my neighbor's yard and decided to smack them with the book, which obviously I'd never do, it's very clear that in our legalistic society, there is objective wrong in the fact that I cannot inflict any type of physical harm on a human being if there was no justification in it in the first place. And even in our legalistic systems, right, there can be different degrees and variations of how that's interpreted. That's the whole point of the study of law, right? But at the same time, we know if we surveyed everybody on my block, if I went out and did that, they would say, you're loco. Okay, it's crazy if somebody's doing these types of things, right? And so we don't need to have a judicial system to be able to say, oh yeah, that was crazy that that guy went out there, blah, 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 blah. If we would have gone back hundreds of years to the same thing when these laws didn't exist, right? People would have had that same fundamental understanding, but there wasn't the same protections then to guarantee them safety and immunity under the law for a multiplicity of reasons. Now, where this string, this tangent is going, is leading us to this definitive idea of how legalism can still play an important role in our lives today. Because when we as individuals begin to start living lives where we recognize again that definitiveness that exists just simply in objective reality, we begin to enter into a more immersive experience of our own lived world each and every single day. Because when we start accepting that there is something intrinsically bad about being a couch potato your entire life, all of a sudden the people that have no any type of ambiguity towards the notion of being a couch potato have to face that objective reality, have to be legalistic with themselves, and then they have to go out and live their own life that is more fulfilling in their own objective reality. And it's the same thing if somebody was a religious, austere person who completely defamed any type of carnality to themselves, right? They are neglecting an entire fact of their being, whether it's for ascetic purposes or not. But at the same time, if dependent on the way in which they're using it, they need to then orient themselves towards the real reality, which again is that we're consummate human beings and people that have these experiences that at times, might want to put some salt on our rice or whatever your flavoring may be if you're living a totally ascetic lifestyle. So coming to these understandings, which seem contrary, they seem like they're a dichotomy in many ways, can actually be the key that unlocks a deeper reality. When we face objective truth, when we face walls that are hard blocks in our reality, all it means is that we now get to discover a new route to go ahead and take, instead of just saying that there isn't a path and meandering. Because even though some of the greatest tales we've ever had as a human species have been these stories of journey, a lot of them are about that especially topic in itself, the Odyssey, the journey, the epic. It's not the wandering. And some of the tales that do tell about these types of wanderings per se still end up having that objective arc to them that defines the way in which it interacts with society as a whole. And so, again, at the end of the day, what I'm really encouraging here by this whole intertwining of legalism, social and political theory, along with lifestyle adjustments and the aptitude to discern for judgments of right and wrong, is this idea that wherever you're finding yourself right now, you should start holding yourself a little bit more accountable in some way. Because for me, I am terrible. I'm really bad at it. Because I am very comfortable with having the type of lifestyle that I think is promulgated a lot of the time in our modern world, which is one of ambiguity, wandering, and sure, there's people that find directionality, but more often than not, it's an artificialized one. And just so that way I can elaborate on that really quickly, it's that same concept that I've talked about before, where they're using some type of artificial, second existential objective for their own definition of purpose and path, rather than turning inward to look for the purpose and path. And if they can fully acknowledge that that's the difference, I personally do not see the wrong in it. But at the same time, I personally also don't see how it is equally as fulfilling. So, finding that joy is what is the most amazing and important thing. Because you think that you live a very happy life when you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. And all of a sudden, when you have these barriers imposed on you, you start experiencing these feelings of joy and happiness and fulfillment that you didn't know you had. They're different than the ones you were experiencing before in ambiguity, but they have the same flavor to them almost, which is also what equally makes it just as hard to then enter into that world and then step outside of it, because it feels like they're meant to be like this. They're meant to be totally interconnected and you can switch in between them. And maybe for some persons in their own philosophies, that may be the conclusion that they arrive at. Obviously, I have logic and reason that for me personally doesn't lead me there. But at the same time, it's that challenge, that roadblock of saying, okay, maybe they don't actually do this. Maybe there's something here in the middle that stops them. But because of that, it doesn't mean that these two things now have to live independently of one another, but they can coexist in a way that I acknowledge both of them, and at the same time fully appreciate them for what they are, while at the same time not being slaves to either of them. And to me, that is the most beautiful thing, is that discernment that comes from our legalistic understanding of objective reality and its direct impacts on humans and how we interact with one another each and every single day. And so you, my friends, get to figure out what that means for you and exactly what that looks like for you.